The smell of burnt ozone and stale hydraulic fluid was the only thing Harlan Cross trusted anymore. It was a reliable
You are
stench.
unlike anyone
It
I've
meant the
ever
ship was
known.
breathing.
And you are
He
not
lay on
what
his
I
back on the
expected.
cold grating of the lower engineering bay, a heavy tungsten wrench
What
gripped in
is
his
this
right hand.
power?
His left hand rested on his chest. It was trembling. Just a slight rhythmic flutter of the fingers barely noticeable in the dim amber light of the hull. But Harlan noticed it. He always noticed it. He squeezed his left hand into a fist, feeling the tight, unnatural pull of the thick burn scars that crawled from his knuckles all the way past his elbow. 32 years old, and he felt like an obsolete machine. "Captain Cross," the voice crackled through the intercom, distorted by the rusted speakers of the dust runner. Harlan didn't answer immediately. He gave the pressure valve above him one last violent twist, the metal groan seating perfectly into place. He wiped the black grease from his knuckles onto his coveralls and reached for the comms button. "Yeah, I'm here." "Docking clamp release in 2 minutes. Your cargo is aboard." The Coalition dispatcher sounded bored. They always did. "Understood," Harlan grunted. He climbed up from the maintenance trench, his boots clanking against the steel deck. He didn't want this job. He hauled scrap. He hauled dead satellites and refined ore from the outer belt. He didn't haul people. But when a Coalition general freezes your transit accounts and tells you that you have a passenger, you don't argue. You just prep the hyperdrive and keep your mouth shut. He made his way to the upper deck, wiping his hands on an old rag. The airlock cycled with a heavy hiss, equalizing the pressure. Standing in the center of the cargo bay was his passenger. She was draped in a heavy woven cloak, the color of deep space. It swallowed her features completely, the hood pulled low over her face. She was tall, taller than Harlan by at least 2 inches, and she stood with a stillness that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. It wasn't the stillness of someone who was afraid. It was the stillness of a loaded rifle. Beside her sat a thermal cargo crate reinforced with lead lining. It looked like it weighed 300 pounds. "You're the passenger," Harlan said. His voice was gravel-scraped raw by years of breathing recycled air. The cloaked figure gave a single slow nod. "Listen," Harlan said, tossing the rag onto a nearby crate. "I don't know who you are and I don't care. I get paid to move you from this rock to Proxima Station. You stay in the passenger quarters. You don't touch the navigation array. You don't touch the life support dials. We clear." Again, just a nod. Harlan frowned. He hated mysteries. He walked over to the heavy thermal crate. "I'll need to secure this in the hold. Stand back." He bent his knees, gripping the reinforced handles of the crate. He braced his core, preparing to heave the massive dead weight. Before he could pull, a hand reached out from beneath the cloak. Harlan froze. The hand was unlike anything he had ever seen. The skin was a pale, stormy gray, smooth and flawless. But beneath the surface, faint geometric lines pulsed with a dim amber light. It looked like a circuit board woven directly into her biology. Her fingers wrapped around the top handle of the crate. With a casual, almost absent-minded motion, she lifted the 300-pound box with one arm. She didn't grunt. Her posture didn't shift. She held it suspended in the air as if it were made of balsa wood. "Lead the way, Captain," she said. Her voice was melodic, carrying a strange resonant echo that seemed to vibrate in Harlan's teeth. Harlan stared at the crate, then at her hidden face. He swallowed the questions rising in his throat. In the outer rims, curiosity didn't kill the cat. It got the cat vented out of an airlock. "Down the hall, last door on the left." He watched her walk away, her steps completely silent on the metal deck. 3 days out, the deep black. The Dust Runner was a ghost ship in the vast emptiness between star systems. Harlan sat in the command chair, a chipped mug of black coffee in his good hand. The ship hummed around him, a steady, comforting vibration. The passenger had stayed in her quarters. Harlan hadn't seen her since she boarded. He looked at the chronometer. 400 hours. The rest of the galaxy was asleep. Then the radar screen flared brilliant crimson. Before Harlan could even register the proximity warning, the ship slammed sideways. The impact was catastrophic. The sound was deafening, the shriek of tearing titanium and the explosive crack of displaced armor plating. Harlan was thrown from his chair, his shoulder hitting the bulkhead with a bone-jarring crunch. His coffee mug shattered, sending scalding liquid across the deck. Red emergency lights strobed violently, and then the alarm started. It was a high-pitched mechanical scream. A rapid rhythmic pulse. Harlan's breath hitched. He pushed himself up from the deck, but his legs felt like lead. The sound. It was the exact same pitch, the exact same cadence of the alarm that had echoed through the engineering bay 5 years ago. Suddenly, he wasn't on the command deck of the Dust Runner. He was back on the mining rig. He could feel the blistering heat of the ruptured plasma line. He could hear his younger brother's voice screaming from the other side of the blast door. Harlan, the valve. Turn the valve. He looked down at his left hand. It was shaking violently, tremoring uncontrollably. 5 years ago, he had stared at that valve. He had hesitated. 3 seconds. 3 seconds of paralyzing fear, wondering if the pressure would blow his arm off. 3 seconds was all it took for the chamber to flash fry. Another blast rocked the Dust Runner. Sparks rained down from the overhead consoles like a dying firework display. Captain, the melodic voice cut through the chaos. Harlan blinked, the memory shattering. The passenger was standing in the doorway of the bridge. Her cloak was gone. Harlan stared momentarily, forgetting the attack. She wore a form-fitting suit of dark fibrous material that left her arms and neck bare. The gray skin he had seen earlier covered her entirely, but it was the glowing lines that caught his eye. They traced intricate mathematical patterns across her collarbones, down her arms, and across her cheeks. They were glowing brightly now, pulsing with an intense warning amber. Her eyes, unhidden, were large in a piercing luminous gold. "They are targeting the engine manifolds," she said, her voice unnaturally calm amidst the screaming alarms. "They are not pirates. They are hunters. They are here for me." Harlan's mind snapped back to the present. The radar showed 3 sleek predatory vessels moving in perfect military formation. They were fast. Too fast for a freighter. "Shields are dropping," Harlan grunted, pulling himself back into the command chair. His left hand was still shaking. He grabbed his own wrist with his right hand, squeezing hard, forcing the tremor to stop. Not this time. He ground his teeth together. The muscles in his jaw locked. He would not hesitate. Not today, not ever again. "They're going to board us," he said, his voice a low growl. "They want the engines dead so they can breach the airlock." "Can we outrun them?" she asked. "No." Harlan reached under the main console, his fingers finding the heavy analog lever for the master breaker. It was a fail-safe, a last resort. But they can't hit what they can't see. "Captain, if you cut the core, we lose life support. If I don't, we lose our lives." Harlan didn't wait for her permission. He yanked the lever down with all his strength. The heavy thrum of the engines died instantly. The artificial gravity lessened, making them slightly buoyant. The screens went black. The screaming alarms abruptly cut off, leaving a ringing silence in their wake. Even the red emergency lights died. The Dust Runner went completely dark, adrift in the void. A cold piece of dead metal tumbling through space. Harlan sat in the pitch black. The only light in the entire room came from the woman standing a few feet away. The bioluminescent lines on her skin cast a soft, eerie glow across the command deck. "Will it work?" she whispered. "I shut down the thermal exhaust and the electromagnetic signature," Harlan said softly. "To their sensors, we just turned into a floating asteroid. Now we wait." They waited. The silence was heavier than the gravity. Every creak of the cooling hull sounded like a gunshot. Through the reinforced viewport, Harlan watched the 3 predatory ships sweep past them, their thrusters glowing blue against the endless dark. They circled, searching for the heat signature that had vanished into thin air. For 10 agonizing minutes, neither of them breathed. Finally, the 3 ships banked hard and engaged their hyperdrives, flashing away into the distance, assuming their prey had jumped to light speed. Harlan let out a long, ragged exhale. He leaned back in the chair, rubbing a hand over his face. "They're gone," he said. "For now," she replied. The glow of her skin dimmed slightly, settling into a steady, rhythmic pulse that matched her heartbeat. "We have a problem," Harlan said, his voice tight. "The engines. The core took a direct hit from an ion pulse right before I pulled the breaker. The main relays are fused. I can't just flip the switch and turn the lights back on. It's going to take hours to bypass the burnt wiring." She stepped closer to the console. The ambient light from her skin illuminated the frost that was already beginning to form on the edges of the viewport. "Without power, we have no environmental controls," she stated. "Yeah," Harlan said, his breath already pluming in the air as a white mist. And out here, the ambient temperature of space is going to bleed through the hull fast. In an hour, it'll be below freezing. In 2, it'll be fatal. He stood up. His joints were already feeling stiff. Stay here. Harlan navigated the dark corridors by memory, his hand tracing the familiar cold steel of the bulkheads. The ship was cooling rapidly. The metal was biting into his palms. He made his way to his personal quarters, a cramped metal box that smelled of engine grease and cheap soap. He opened his footlocker and pulled out the single piece of gear that mattered. It was a heavy-duty military-grade survival sleeping bag, rated for Arctic conditions. It had a self-contained microheater woven into the fabric powered by an independent kinetic battery. It was the only one on the ship. He grabbed an emergency thermal ration pack, a self-heating block of dense protein, and walked back to the bridge. When he returned, the temperature had plummeted. The cold was a physical weight pressing against his chest, making each breath sting his lungs. Frost was creeping across the deck plates like a spider web. She was sitting in the co-pilot's chair, her arms wrapped around her torso. Her gray skin looked paler, and the glowing lines had dimmed to a faint, sickly yellow. She was shivering. Harlan walked over and dropped the heavy sleeping bag onto the deck beside her. He unrolled it, hitting the activation switch. A faint, low hum emanated from the fabric as the microheater kicked in. He tossed the warm ration block into her lap. "Eat that, then get in the bag," he ordered. She looked down at the ration, then up at him. Her large gold eyes searched his face in the dim light. "What about you?" "I'll be fine. There is only one bag." "I know how to count," Harlan said, his voice flat. He turned away, walking over to the engineering access panel on the floor. He pulled out a crowbar and pried the heavy grate open, exposing the maze of burnt wiring beneath the deck. "Captain," she said, her voice trembling slightly from the cold. "Human physiology cannot withstand these temperatures for long. You will freeze to death." "I've got work to do," Harlan said. He knelt by the open grate, pulling a flashlight from his belt. He bit the end of the flashlight, holding it in his teeth, and reached into the mess of wires. It was a lie. He couldn't fix it right now. The wires were too hot from the surge, and the ambient temperature was dropping too fast to work with bare hands. But he needed a reason to turn his back. He needed her to take the bag without an argument. He owed a life. He had cost his brother his life by hesitating. He wasn't going to let this woman freeze while he stayed warm. It was a simple, brutal mathematics that governed his soul. He was a wrench turner, expendable. She was, whatever she was, something important enough to send a military hit squad after. "Get in the bag," he mumbled around the flashlight. He heard the rustle of the heavy fabric. He heard the metallic zip. He sat by the grate, his arms resting on his knees. The cold was brutal now. It seeped through his boots, crawled up his legs, and settled in his bones. The scars on his left arm ached with a deep, pulsing agony. The damaged nerve endings screamed in the freezing air. He gritted his teeth, refusing to make a sound. He stared into the dark hole of the engineering panel. His breath came in shallow, ragged clouds. His eyelashes were heavy with frost. He was tired. He had been tired for 5 years. Maybe sitting in the dark, letting the cold quietly pull him under, wasn't the worst way to go. It was quiet. It was peaceful. There were no alarms here. "Harlan." He didn't move. He hadn't told her his first name. "Harlan, look at me." He slowly turned his head. His neck cracked. She was sitting up in the sleeping bag. The microheater was doing its job. The air immediately around her shimmered slightly with warmth. The lines on her skin were glowing brighter again, a steady, warm amber. She wasn't looking at him with pity. She was looking at him with a strange, intense curiosity. "You are punishing yourself," she said softly. It wasn't a question. "I'm fixing my ship," he rasped. His lips were numb. "You haven't moved a wire in 10 minutes. Your core temperature is dropping. I can see the heat leaving your body." She reached out, unzipping the sleeping bag halfway. "Come here." "No, Ite, I am not asking, Captain." Her voice shifted. It wasn't melodic anymore. It held the heavy, undeniable weight of command. "You cannot protect me if you are dead. Get in the bag." Harlan stared at her. The cold was making his thoughts sluggish. The logic was sound. He couldn't fly the ship if he was a frozen corpse. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself up from the floor. His knees popped. He stumbled, slightly, the lack of feeling in his feet making him clumsy. He reached the sleeping bag and sank down onto the deck. He didn't want to get in. It felt like a violation of the penance he had assigned himself. But the ambient heat radiating from the open zipper was intoxicating. "Take off your boots and your heavy jacket," she instructed. "The material reflects body heat. The insulation of your outer layers will prevent the transfer of warmth." Harlan's fingers were stiff, but he managed to unlace his heavy work boots and kick them off. He unzipped his grease-stained jacket and let it drop to the floor, leaving him in a thin undershirt and utility pants. He slid into the bag beside her. It was a tight fit. The bag was designed for one large man, not two adults. He had to lie on his side, his back pressed against the tough outer fabric, his chest inches from hers. The warmth hit him like a physical blow. It was agonizing at first as the blood rushed back into his freezing extremities. He squeezed his eyes shut, his jaw clenched tight, trying to suppress the violent shivering that racked his body. "Breathe," she whispered. He felt a sudden shift. She moved closer. Harlan opened his eyes. In the cramped, dark space of the sleeping bag, her face was inches from his. The glowing geometric lines on her skin illuminated her features perfectly. She was beautiful, but in a harsh, alien way, like a statue carved from storm clouds and starlight. "You are still freezing," she said. Before he could process what she was doing, she reached down and took hold of the hem of her dark, fibrous suit. With a fluid, unhesitating motion, she pulled it over her head and tossed it out of the sleeping bag onto the dark deck. Harlan froze. His breath caught in his throat. She was completely bare. The geometric lines weren't just on her face and arms. They mapped her entire body. They flowed over her collarbones, circled her breasts, traced the curve of her ribs, and vanished down her hips. They pulsed with a living, breathing light. Harlan immediately averted his eyes, staring hard at the zipper of the sleeping bag over her shoulder. The heat rushed to his face, entirely separate from the warmth of the bag. "What are you doing?" he choked out, his voice hoarse. "Optimizing thermal transfer," she replied, her tone completely matter-of-fact. "Biological friction and skin-to-skin contact will raise your core temperature 70% faster. Why are you looking away?" Harlan squeezed his eyes shut. "Because I'm a man, and you're naked." "I am aware," she said. There was genuine confusion in her voice. "Is the human male threatened by the female form?" "No, it's about boundaries. Decency. Decency is a social construct. Hypothermia is a biological reality. Look at me, Harlan." He didn't want to, but the gentle command in her voice pulled at him. He slowly turned his head back. She wasn't trying to be seductive. There was no coy smile, no invitation. She was looking at him the way a mechanic looks at an engine that needs tuning. Pure analytical focus. She reached out, her hand warm and smooth, pressed flat against the center of his chest. "Your heart rate is elevated," she noted. "Yeah, well," Harlan muttered, trying to press himself further back into the nylon wall of the bag. "It's been a long day." Her eyes dropped from his face. She looked down at his left arm lying between them. In the amber glow of her skin, the thick, twisted burn scars looked grotesque, angry raised tissue that pulled the skin tight. She reached out and traced the edge of the scar with her fingertips. Harlan flinched, not from pain, but from the instinct to hide his failure. "Does it hurt?" she asked. "Not anymore." "That is a lie. I can see the localized inflammation in the tissue. It causes you chronic discomfort." Her hand moved. She was exploring him now, her curiosity entirely detached from the human concepts of intimacy. She traced the muscles of his forearm, the calluses on his hands. "Human anatomy is remarkably fragile," she murmured. "Your vital organs are shielded only by a thin cage of calcium." Her hand slid lower, moving over his stomach, brushing past the waistband of his utility pants. Harlan stopped breathing. Her fingers brushed against his groin. It wasn't a caress, it was a prod, like she was inspecting a strange piece of machinery. "What is the evolutionary purpose of this external placement?" she asked, her golden eyes looking up at him with pure academic inquiry. "It seems entirely vulnerable to blunt force trauma." Harlan stared at her. The sheer absurdity of the moment collided with the adrenaline, the cold, and the exhaustion. He was trapped in a sleeping bag on a dead ship in deep space, freezing to death, while an alien princess clinically critiqued his reproductive organs. A sound started deep in Harlan's chest. It was a dry, rusty sound. It bubbled up his throat, forcing its way past his lips. He barked a laugh, then another, and then he was laughing out loud, a deep, booming, genuine laugh that echoed in the tiny space. He threw his head back against the nylon floor, his chest heaving. It was the first time he had laughed in 5 years. It felt like glass breaking in his chest, shattering a wall he had built stone by stone. Valia pulled her hand back, blinking in surprise. The glowing lines on her skin flared brightly, reacting to his sudden shift in emotion. "Did I cause you pain?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "No!" "Oh," Harlan gasped, wiping a tear from the corner of his eye. "No, sweetheart. You didn't hurt me. Just maybe keep your hands above the equator." "The equator, saying above the belt," he clarified, still chuckling softly. The heavy, suffocating weight of his guilt hadn't vanished, but for the first time in half a decade, there was a crack of light shining through it. "On Earth, we keep those parts under wraps unless we're buying someone dinner first." Valia tilted her head, studying him. The confusion faded from her eyes, replaced by a quiet understanding. "Your stress hormones have plummeted," she observed softly. "Your heart rate has stabilized. You are, amused." "Yeah, I guess I am." Harlan looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the loneliness in her golden eyes, a loneliness that matched his own. "I am Vaelia," she said quietly. "Harlan," he replied. He relaxed, letting his shoulder rest against the deck. The shivering had stopped. The ambient heat between them was doing its work. "Rest, Harlan," she said. She shifted, turning slightly, so her back was to him, pulling the edge of the sleeping bag up to her shoulders. "I will monitor the ship's temperature." Harlan lay in the dark, the rhythmic glow of her skin casting slow amber shadows across the ceiling. He listened to her steady breathing. For the first time in a very long time, he closed his eyes and he didn't see the fire. He just saw the light. Time lost its meaning in the dark. Inside the heavy nylon shell of the survival bag, the universe was reduced to the space of a few square feet. Harlan lay on his back, staring up into the pitch-black canopy. The microheater hummed a low, steady vibration against his spine. Beside him, Vielia was a map of living constellations. The amber lines mapping her skin had settled into a slow, rhythmic pulse. It matched the rise and fall of her chest. She had shifted closer as the hours dragged on, seeking the center of the heat. Her head rested lightly against his right shoulder. Her breathing was a quiet, steady metronome. Harlan didn't move away. For a man who had spent 5 years pushing people away, the proximity should have been suffocating. It wasn't. It was grounding. He felt the smooth, warm weight of her arm draped casually across his ribs. His left hand rested on his stomach. Unconsciously, his thumb began to tap against his index finger. Tap, tap, tap. A nervous rhythm, a ghost of the tremor that always haunted him when the ship went too quiet. Valia's hand slid across his chest. Her long gray fingers gently closed over his left hand, stilling his thumb. She didn't squeeze. She just held it. "Your mind is racing, Harlan," she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. "Habit," he whispered back. "You are waiting for the fire again." He swallowed hard. The lump in his throat felt like ground glass. "Always." "There is no fire here," she said. Her golden eyes opened, looking up at him in the dim amber glow of her own skin. "There is only the cold, and we are holding it back." Harlan looked down at her. He saw the sharp alien angles of her face, the mesmerizing flow of the light beneath her skin. He didn't see a passenger anymore. He saw a survivor, someone who understood the weight of the dark. He relaxed his hand, letting her fingers lace through his. "Yeah," he breathed. "We're holding it back." She closed her eyes again, nestling her face against the crook of his neck. "Good." They drifted in the silence. The dust runner groaned around them, the titanium hull protesting as the deep space freeze contracted its bones. Then the humming stopped. Harlan felt it instantly. The vibration against his spine ceased. The small green indicator light on the bag's zipper collar flickered and died. The kinetic battery was tapped out. "Damn it," Harlan hissed. Almost immediately, the ambient temperature inside the bag began to drop. The microscopic barrier of heat vanished, replaced by the biting, creeping chill of the void. Valia stirred her glowing lines, flaring slightly in response to the sudden temperature shift. "The heater, dead," Harlan said, his voice grim. He started to unzip the bag. "Stay here." Keep it closed tight to trap whatever body heat is left. What are you doing? I have to bypass those relays, Harlan said, pushing himself up. The air outside the bag hit him like a physical blow. It was easily 20 below zero in the cabin now. His breath instantly turned to thick white ice crystals. If I don't get the core jump-started, in the next 20 minutes the atmospheric scrubbers will freeze solid. We'll suffocate before we freeze to death. Your hands are already losing dexterity, Valia stated, sitting up. The cold didn't seem to affect her violently, but her skin paled further. You cannot splice microfilament wire in this state. Watch me, Harlan growled. He crawled out of the bag, his boots hitting the frost-covered steel deck. He grabbed his heavy jacket and shoved his arms into the sleeves, but the fabric was already frozen stiff. He dropped to his knees beside the open engineering grate. He grabbed the flashlight, biting down on it again, and reached into the tangled mess of burnt wiring. It was impossible. His fingers were numb blocks of wood. He couldn't feel the delicate filaments. He fumbled with the wire strippers, dropping them onto the grating. They clattered uselessly into the dark subdeck. Harlan slammed his fist against the bulkhead in frustration. Damn it, he was failing, again. He stared into the dark hole, the memory of his brother's screams clawing at the edges of his mind. He was going to let someone die because his hands couldn't do the job. A soft amber glow illuminated the tangled wires. Harlan looked up. Valia was standing over him. She had stepped out of the sleeping bag. She was completely bare to the freezing air, her dark fibrous suit still lying discarded on the floor. Get back in the bag, Harlan barked, the flashlight muffled in his teeth. You'll freeze. She didn't listen. She knelt down beside him on the frosted grating. The lines on her skin were changing. They weren't a steady amber anymore. They were brightening, shifting from a warm gold to a blinding, incandescent white. Valia, what are you doing? The dust runner requires a massive thermal and electrical surge to bypass the fused relays. She said, her voice completely calm, though her eyes were narrowed in intense concentration. Human technology is crude. It relies on external combustion. My people do not. She reached her bare hands into the jagged, burnt mess of the main power conduit. Don't touch that, Harlan yelled, dropping the flashlight. If the reserve capacitor discharges, it'll stop your heart. My heart, Valia said, looking directly into his eyes, is an engine. She gripped the severed ends of the primary power cables. The light inside her skin exploded. Harlan threw his arm over his eyes, blinded by the sudden localized sun that ignited in the dark cabin. A low, bass-heavy hum filled the air, vibrating the fillings in his teeth. It wasn't the sound of machinery. It was the sound of raw, biological power. Sparks showered from her hands, raining down onto the frost-covered deck. Valia threw her head back, a sharp gasp escaping her lips. The geometric lines across her body flared so brightly they seemed to detach from her skin, floating like halos of pure energy. She was acting as a living conduit. She was bleeding her own life force into the dead veins of the dust runner. Thrum. Deep in the belly of the ship, the massive ion core coughed. Thrum, thrum, whirr. The master breaker slammed upward with a heavy clank. The overhead lights flickered, strobing wildly before snapping into a steady, harsh white glare. The ventilation fans roared to life, blasting stale, lukewarm air into the freezing cabin. The gravity plating normalized, pulling Harlan's knees firmly against the deck. Valia let go of the cables. The brilliant white light vanished from her skin, crashing instantly back to a dull, sickly gray. Her eyes rolled back and she collapsed forward. Harlan caught her before she hit the steel grating. She was as cold as ice. The glowing lines were gone entirely, leaving only faint ash-colored scars where the light had been. Valia, Harlan shouted, pulling her into his lap. He grabbed his heavy frozen jacket from the floor and wrapped it tightly around her naked shoulders. He scooped her up in his arms, ignoring the screaming protest of his own frozen muscles, and carried her back to the co-pilot's chair. He strapped her in, pulling the nylon sleeping bag over her lap. Her eyelids fluttered. She looked up at him, her golden eyes dim and unfocused. The ship, she whispered. The ship is breathing, Harlan said, his chest heaving as he checked her pulse. It was faint. Too faint. You crazy bastard. You jump-started a Class 4 freighter with your bare hands. What are you? She offered, a weak ghost of a smile. I told you. They are hunting me. Who are we? The Krell Empire. And the traitors within my own people. She took a slow, rattling breath. The lines, they are the primal pattern, the genetic marker of the Lumina throne. I am the crown princess. My father is dead. They want the pattern extinguished. Harlan stared at her. He wiped a streak of engine grease from his cheek. He was a scrap hauler from the slums of Chicago. He traded in broken parts and cheap whiskey. He didn't do galactic politics. He didn't do royalty. But he looked at the woman shivering in his jacket. She hadn't ordered him to fix the ship. She had bled herself dry to save them both. Okay, Your Highness, Harlan said, his voice dropping an octave. Let's get you home. He turned toward the command console. The screens were booting up flashing lines of diagnostic code. Then the proximity radar screamed. It wasn't a warning beep. It was a solid, piercing shriek. Harlan looked at the main view screen. The void of space tore open. 3 massive slip space ruptures flared violently, and 3 gargantuan warships bled into real space. They were ugly, jagged things built like armored spearheads. The insignia of the Krell Empire, a crimson, multi-eyed serpent, was painted across their prows. They hadn't left. They had been waiting for the Duster Runner to turn its lights back on. Vessel Duster Runner, a guttural synthesized voice boomed over the open comms channel. You are harboring a fugitive of the Krell Empire. Power down your thrusters and prepare to be boarded. Compliance is mandatory. Resistance is death. Harlan didn't reach for the comms button. He reached for the master throttle. Harlan, Valia said, her voice weak. They're weapons. They will tear this ship apart. They have to catch us first. Harlan's hands flew across the console. He was a mechanic before he was a pilot. He knew exactly how much stress a titanium hull could take before it sheared, and he knew exactly how to bypass the safety limiters on the thrusters. His left hand gripped the yoke. It was rock steady, not a single tremor. Hold on, he growled. He slammed the throttle forward to maximum yield. The Dust Runner screamed. The sudden acceleration pinned them both deep into their seats. The ship shot forward like a bullet fired from a rusted gun, banking violently to the left to avoid a barrage of green plasma fire from the Krell dreadnoughts. Where are we going? Valia yelled over the roar of the overstressed engines. Scanners are picking up a radiation storm 2 sectors over. The Vale Nebula. Harlan said, his eyes locked on the navigational heads-up display. It's a dead zone, full of ionized WAM and magnetic shear. Their targeting computers won't be able to lock on in there. The radiation will fry our life support. It'll fry them too if they follow us. It's a game of chicken, and I don't plan on blinking. Through the viewport, the Vale Nebula loomed like a bruised, angry god. It was a swirling maelstrom of violent purple gas shot through with veins of highly charged orange plasma. Lightning chained across the void, illuminating the carcasses of ancient dead ships that had strayed too close to its gravity well. The Krell warships were gaining. A plasma bolt clipped the rear deflector shield of the Dust Runner, sending a violent shudder through the entire deck. Alarms wailed. Shields at 40%, Harlan barked. He didn't slow down. He aimed the blunt nose of the freighter directly into the heart of the purple storm. They hit the nebula wall like a truck hitting a snowbank. The view screen vanished into a blinding swirl of valiant colors. The ship pitched violently, caught in a magnetic riptide. Hailstones of frozen ammonia hammered against the hull like machine gun fire. The Geiger counter on the dashboard began to click frantically, then blurred into a solid, terrifying buzz. We are blind, Valia said, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair. So are they, Harlan replied, his jaw clenched tight as he fought the yoke, trying to keep the ship from tumbling end over end. The radar screen was a mess of static, but Harlan saw the blips of the Krell warships peel away. They were heavy cruisers, too big, too reliant on their automated systems to risk navigating a blind magnetic storm. They had stopped at the edge of the nebula. They backed off, Harlan said, his chest heaving. He eased the throttle back. The Dust Runner drifted through the violent, beautiful chaos of the gas clouds. Harlan, Valia said. Her voice was stronger now. The ambient energy of the nebula seemed to be feeding her. The faint outlines of her amber lines were beginning to return. Transfer helm control to my station. Why? Because we are not hiding, she said. She reached out, her fingers dancing across the secondary keypad. We are going home. She inputted a massive string of coordinates too fast for Harlan to track. It wasn't a standard navigational algorithm. It looked like music transposed into mathematics. A specific frequency pulsed from the dust runner's comm array, cutting through the static of the storm. Suddenly, the swirling purple clouds ahead of them parted. It wasn't a natural clearing. The gas was being repelled by a massive invisible displacement field. Harlan stared in awe. Floating in the eye of the storm was a structure of breathtaking scale. It was built of a dark, light-absorbing metal shaped like a massive multi-tiered lotus flower. There were no running lights, no visible thrusters. It was a ghost station, hidden in the most hostile environment in the sector. "My father's sanctuary," Valia said softly, reverence in her tone. "Built for the day the traitors showed their hand. They do not know it exists." The massive petals of the station slowly rotated, revealing a softly lit docking bay. Harlan guided the battered, scorched dust runner into the bay. The magnetic clamps engaged with a heavy final thud. The airlock extended. They had made it. The interior of the sanctuary was completely silent. The air smelled of ozone and something sweet like rain on hot stone. The architecture was organic, sweeping curves and arches of polished black stone illuminated by soft bioluminescent moss that grew in the crevices. There were no guards, no welcoming committee. The station was entirely automated, waiting for the air to return. Harlan walked beside Valia, his heavy boots echoing loudly in the vast empty halls. He felt out of place. He was a mechanic covered in grease and sweat walking through a cathedral. She led him to the central chamber. It was a circular room open to a massive reinforced glass dome that looked out into the violent purple heart of the nebula. In the center of the room was a raised dais carved with the same geometric patterns that adorned Valia's skin. "The journey is not over, Harlan," Valia said. She turned to face him. The ambient light of the room seemed to respond to her, growing brighter, shifting to a warm gold. Her own lines were fully restored now, pulsing with the deep, healthy light. "You need to hide here," Harlan said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I can take the ship. I can draw the Krell away. Make them think you're still on board." "No," she stepped closer to him. "The Krell will not stop until the pattern is dead. Hiding is no longer an option. I must claim the throne at Proxima, but to do that I must awaken the full power of the pattern, and I cannot do it alone." Harlan frowned. "I don't understand. I'm just a wrench turner. I don't have an army to give you." "I do not need an army," Valia said softly. "I need an anchor." She reached out and took his hands. Her grip was strong, surprisingly warm. "My people, the Lumina, we do not rule by force. We rule by connection. The primal pattern is a bridge. It allows us to share minds, to understand the truth of another living being without the filter of lies or language. It is why the traitors fear me. They cannot hide their ambition from the pattern." She stepped up onto the first step of the dais, bringing her eyes level with his. "The awakening requires a bond, a grounding force. Someone who knows the dark but chooses the light. Someone who does not flinch." Harlan tried to pull his hands back, suddenly terrified. Not of her, but of being seen. "Valia, no, you don't want in my head. There's nothing good in there. It's just failure and fire." "Let me see," she whispered. She let go of his hands and raised her fingers to his face. She pressed her thumbs gently against his temples. Harlan gasped. The world dissolved into white light. He wasn't standing in the sanctuary anymore. He was falling backward, tumbling through the chaotic filing cabinet of his own mind. He was back on the dust runner, freezing in the sleeping bag. He heard his own laughter echoing. Then he was falling faster. He was on the command deck, gripping the master breaker. He felt the terrifying ice-cold rush of adrenaline as he plunged the ship into darkness. And then he was there. The memory he fought every single night. The mining rig. The deafening roar of the ruptured plasma line. The blinding heat blistering his face. He was looking through the reinforced glass of the blast door. His younger brother Tommy was on the other side, trapped in the containment room. "Harlan, the valve. Turn the valve." Harlan looked at his hand on the heavy iron wheel. If he turned it, the pressure would vent, saving Tommy, but the vent was directly above Harlan's arm. It would melt the flesh from his bones. He froze. He stared at his hand. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds of pure, selfish animal terror. When he finally wrenched the wheel down, the plasma vented. His arm caught fire. The pain was beyond human comprehension. But it was too late. The delay had caused the containment field to fail. The glass shattered. The room exploded. Harlan screamed, living the memory again, feeling the heat, the smell of burning hair, the crushing infinite weight of the guilt. I killed him. I hesitated. Look again. Velia's voice wasn't in his ears. It was inside his mind, calm, steady, an anchor in the storm. The memory paused. The fire froze midair. You are a human, her voice resonated. You are fragile. You felt pain that would break a stone, and yet you still turned the wheel. You still burned yourself to train. The memory shifted. It wasn't the fire anymore. He was standing on the bridge of the dust runner. The alarms were screaming. The Krell were coming. He saw himself from Valia's perspective. He saw a man with a scarred, trembling hand. He saw the terror in his own eyes. But then he saw himself grip his wrist. He saw the tremble stop. He saw himself grab the master breaker and pull it down, plunging them into the freezing dark without a fraction of a second's hesitation. He saw himself kneeling in the freezing cold, refusing to get in the sleeping bag so he could try to fix the ship. He saw himself giving up his only source of warmth. You carried your failure for 5 years. Valia's presence whispered a warm golden light, wrapping around his fractured mind. And you used it to forge iron. You did not hesitate this time, Harlan. You saved my life. I see you. I see all of you. And there is no cowardice here. Harlan broke. Tears he hadn't shed in half a decade spilled down his cheeks. The massive, suffocating knot of guilt in his chest, the weight that had made him a ghost, that had made him push the world away, suddenly unspooled. It didn't vanish, but it was no longer a weapon turning inward. It was just a scar, a part of him. The blinding white light faded. Harlan blinked, pulling in a ragged, shuddering breath. He was back in the sanctuary. Valia was standing before him, her hands still resting gently on his temples. Tears were streaming down her own gray cheeks. She had felt his pain, every ounce of it, but she was transformed. The simple geometric lines on her skin had exploded into magnificent, intricate mandalas of pure light. They cascaded down her neck and arms, a tapestry of blinding, beautiful gold. The primal pattern was fully awake. The air around her hummed with a palpable electric power. She slowly lowered her hands. Harlan looked at her. He didn't feel the need to look away anymore. He didn't feel the need to hide. He lifted his left hand. The thick, twisted burn scars were still there. They always would be, but they didn't ache. The chronic pulsing throb of damaged nerves was gone. His hand was completely still. He looked up at Valia, wiping a tear from his jaw with the back of his hand. I see you too, he whispered. Valia smiled. It was a small, sad, beautiful smile. Then let us finish this, Captain, she said, her voice echoing with the authority of a queen, but the warmth of the woman in the sleeping bag. Take me to Proxima. The Veil Nebula released them with a violent shudder. The dust runner tore through the final layer of ionized gas, breaking out into the clean, freezing black of deep space. The hull groaned, shedding trails of static electricity that sparked and died against the titanium armor. Inside the cockpit, the blinding purple glare of the storm faded, replaced by the familiar, cold points of distant stars. Harlan kept his hands on the yoke. He didn't ease the throttle until the radiation alarms finally choked into silence. He took a slow, deep breath. The air inside the cabin still smelled like burnt copper and sweat. It smelled like survival. He looked down at his left hand. It rested lightly on the thrust manifold. The knuckles were white. The thick, pale ropes of scar tissue stretched tight across the back of his hand, but the fingers were perfectly still. Not a millimeter of tremor. The ghost that had lived in his nerves for 5 years, the phantom vibration of guilt and terror, was gone. He didn't know how to feel about the silence in his own head. He had carried the noise for so long, it had become his only friend. We are clear of the interference, Valia said. She stood by the viewport looking out at the endless dark. She had found a spare flight suit in the storage locker. It was too big for her, a faded navy blue canvas meant for a heavy-set mechanic, but she wore it like armor. The sleeves were rolled up, exposing the pale gray skin of her forearms. The lines were there, the primal pattern. They were no longer the simple, dormant geometry of a fugitive. They were awake. Even in a state of rest, the intricate, sprawling mandalas pulsed with a faint liquid gold light. Beneath her skin, she looked like something forged in the heart of a dying star. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was a queen who had remembered her crown. Proxima Station is 3 hours away at maximum cruising speed. Harlan said, his voice low, scraping against the quiet of the deck. If we push the core, we can make it in 2. Push the core, she replied without turning around. The Krell will not wait. Harlan reached down and engaged the hyperdrive spool. The deep, heavy thrum of the engines returned, vibrating up through the soles of his boots. He liked that feeling. It was tangible. It was real. He stood up from the pilot's chair, engaging the autopilot. I need to prep the airlock and check the pressure seals. If they're waiting for us, it's not going to be a polite conversation. He turned to leave the bridge, but Vaelia stepped into his path. She looked up at him. Her golden eyes were unreadable, a vast ocean of ancient light. The silence stretched between them, heavy and thick. It was the same silence from the sleeping bag, but the context had shifted entirely. They had shared a mind. She had walked through the burning wreckage of his past, and she had not turned away. She had taken his darkest, most shameful failure, and she had shown him the courage buried underneath the ashes. Harlan didn't know how to talk to her now. He was a man who fixed broken machines. He didn't know how to stand in front of royalty. Harlan, she said softly. Yeah. She reached out. Her hand, cool and smooth, touched the rough canvas of his coveralls, resting flat over his heart. The golden light from her fingertips bled through the fabric. You do not have to fight this battle, she said. When we reach Proxima, drop the docking clamps and engage the emergency release. I will board the station alone. You can turn the dust runner around and disappear. I will ensure your transit accounts are cleared. You will have enough credits to buy a fleet of these ships. Harlan looked down at her hand. Then he looked at her face. His jaw tightened. A muscle twitched in his cheek. You think I'm doing this for credits? He asked, his voice barely a whisper, rough as sandpaper. I think you have survived enough, Vaelia said. The Krell are brutal. The traitors of my own blood are worse. You are a human. Your bones break. Your skin tears. I have seen the pain you can endure, but I will not ask you to bleed for a throne that is not yours. Harlan reached up and gently wrapped his scarred, calloused hand around her wrist. He slowly moved her hand away from his chest, but he didn't let go. 5 years ago, Harlan said, his eyes locking onto hers, refusing to blink. I stood behind a piece of reinforced glass and I watched my brother burn because I was afraid. I was afraid of the fire. I was afraid of the pain. I was a coward. He squeezed her wrist just enough to let her feel the strength returning to his grip. I'm not standing behind the glass anymore, Vaelia. He let go of her hand and stepped past her, heading toward the narrow corridor that led to the engineering bay. Nobody touches my ship, he called back over his shoulder. And nobody touches my cargo. We go in together. Vaelia watched his broad back disappear into the shadows of the corridor. The golden lines across her face flared, burning with a sudden, fierce warmth. 2 hours later, Proxima Station filled the view screen. It was a monstrosity of engineering, a sprawling metallic city suspended in the void, glowing with thousands of artificial lights. It was the central hub of the sector, a place where commerce, politics, and crime bled together in a tangle of docking arms and trading concourses. But today, the space around Proxima was not a bustling market. It was a graveyard waiting to happen. A blockade formed a perfect menacing crescent around the primary docking ring. 6 Krell dreadnoughts. They were massive, jagged wedges of black iron, bristling with heavy plasma batteries. They hung in the darkness like starved wolves. They locked down the sector, Harlan muttered, leaning over the sensor console. Station command isn't answering hails. The Krell have completely jammed the local frequencies. They're waiting to see if we survive the nebula, Vaelia said, standing rigid beside his chair. Oh, they see us. Harlan tapped the glass of the radar screen. 3 fast attack interceptors were already breaking formation from the dreadnoughts, accelerating toward the Dust Runner. Vessel Dust Runner, the harsh synthesized voice of the Krell commander blasted through the encrypted emergency channel. It was the same voice from before the nebula. Cold, mechanical, absolute. You are entering restricted space. Cut your main drive and prepare for tractor beam tethering. Any deviation in your trajectory will be met with immediate destruction. Harlan didn't touch the comms. He looked at Vaelia. If I run, they vaporize us, he said flatly. If I let them dock, they board us with a platoon of shock troops. They won't take you alive. They'll execute you on the deck to ensure the pattern dies here. Let them dock, Valia said. Harlan raised an eyebrow. You sure about that, Your Highness? They believe they are boarding a crippled Freya, she said. Her voice was ice. The golden light beneath her skin began to pulse with a slow, terrifying rhythm. They believe they are hunting a victim. Let them open the door. Harlan gave a slow, grim nod. He didn't smile, but a dark satisfaction settled into the lines around his eyes. All right, he said. He reached down and pulled the main throttle all the way back. The heavy vibration of the engines died. The dust runner drifted entirely at the mercy of momentum. Powering down. A violent jolt rocked the ship. The Krell tractor beam locked onto their hull an invisible fist made of gravity. Harlan watched the monitors as the dust runner was dragged against its will toward the belly of the central Krell dreadnought. The massive bay doors of the warship opened, swallowing the small freighter into a cavernous, red-lit hangar. The magnetic clamps slammed down onto the dust runner's landing skids with a deafening metallic crash. We are locked in, Harlan said. He stood up from the console. He didn't reach for a blaster. He didn't put on a tactical vest. He walked over to his battered metal toolbox sitting by the bulkhead. He opened the lid and pulled out a heavy tungsten torque wrench. It was 2 feet long, stained with years of black grease heavy enough to crush a man's skull. He tapped the heavy steel head against his palm. Come on, Harlan said, turning toward the lower airlock. Let's go welcome the neighbors. They stood in the cramped space of the lower cargo bay. The heavy circular door of the main airlock was the only thing standing between them and the Krell boarding party. Through the thick steel of the hull, Harlan could hear the heavy metallic thud of the docking umbilical attaching to the outer door. He heard the hiss of pressurized air equalizing. He heard the heavy synchronized stomping of armored boots, dozens of them. Harlan, Valia whispered in the dark. I'm here. When the door opens, do not look into the light. Look only at me. Harlan tightened his grip on the wrench. He planted his boots shoulder-width apart on the grated floor. Understood. A heavy electronic chime rang through the bay. The green light above the airlock flashed red. The override sequence had been initiated from the outside. The Krell weren't waiting for an invitation. With a deafening shriek of grinding gears, the massive circular door was violently wrenched open. Thick white vapor poured into the cargo bay, a sudden rush of freezing air from the umbilical tube. Heavy, blinding tactical lights cut through the smoke. Harlan squeezed his eyes shut, turning his head away from the blinding glare, keeping his vision locked onto Valia. Through the smoke, the boarding party marched in. They were massive, 7 feet tall, encased in thick, jagged black power armor. The Krell shock troops. They carried heavy plasma repeaters, the muzzles glowing with lethal green energy. They fanned out instantly, securing the perimeter of the small cargo bay. Behind them, a figure stepped through the airlock. He wore the armor of a Krell commander draped in a crimson cape. But standing beside him was someone else. Illumina. He was tall, dressed in elegant, sweeping gray robes. His skin was pale, but the lines on his face were dark, dead channels of black ash. He was a traitor. One of the men who had murdered Valia's father. Secure the mechanic, the Krell commander barked, his voice distorted through his helmet speaker. Kill him if he moves. 3 heavy plasma rifles leveled directly at Harlan's chest. Harlan didn't flinch. He just leaned his weight casually onto the heavy tungsten wrench like it was a walking stick. The Lumina traitor stepped forward, his cold eyes locking onto Valia. Princess Valia, the traitor said, his voice dripping with false sorrow. Your flight ends here. The High Council has declared you an enemy of the peace. You carry illegal volatile technology within your biology. You will be contained. Valia did not move. She stood in the center of the bay, wrapped in the oversized blue canvas flight suit. The golden light beneath her skin was completely hidden. She looked small, defeated. You murdered my father, Tyrus, Valia said. Her voice was soft, carrying a strange resonant echo that seemed to vibrate the deck plates. I saved our people from an obsolete relic, Tyrus sneered. The galaxy is moving forward. The Krell Empire offers us strength. You offer us only ancient superstitions and the weakness of empathy. He gestured to the Krell commander. Take her. Remove the subject's head. The body will be incinerated to destroy the genetic markers. 2 massive Krell shock troops stepped forward, reaching for her. Harlan didn't look at the soldiers. He looked at the bulkhead behind them. He looked at the heavy exposed conduit of the dust runner's primary life support exhaust. He knew every inch of this ship. He knew that the Krell docking umbilical relied on standard magnetic dampeners to maintain the atmospheric seal. He also knew that if he ruptured the freighter's secondary coolant line, the sudden massive spike in localized thermal pressure would blow the magnetic dampeners straight to hell. "Hey, Tyrus," Harlan said. The trader paused, looking at the grease-stained human with contempt. Harlan raised the heavy tungsten wrench. "You forgot one thing about obsolete relics," Harlan said, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face. "They're built to last." Harlan swung the wrench with all his strength. He didn't aim for a soldier. He slammed the heavy steel head directly into the exposed pressurized valve of the coolant line on the bulkhead. The valve snapped clean off. A deafening high-pressure explosion of liquid nitrogen and superheated steam erupted from the wall. It hit the Krell shock troops like a physical wall, throwing the massive armored soldiers backward into the bulkhead. The sudden catastrophic pressure spike tore through the cargo bay. The magnetic seals on the Krell docking umbilical shrieked and failed. A massive EMP shockwave generated by the dust runner's shorting core washed over the room. The Krell power armor died instantly. Their heavy plasma rifles sparked and went dark. The blinding tactical lights shattered. The cargo bay was plunged into near-total darkness, filled with the roar of venting steam and the shouts of disoriented soldiers trapped in dead 1,000-pound suits of armor. "Valia!" Harlan roared over the noise, dropping to one knee to brace against the wind. "No!" In the center of the swirling, freezing white smoke, a son was born. Valia unzipped the heavy canvas flight suit, letting it drop to the floor. The primal pattern did not just glow, it detonated. Blinding liquid gold light erupted from her skin, casting sharp, violent shadows across the bulkheads. The light was so intense it felt heavy, a physical pressure pushing against the air. The intricate mandalas on her body spun and shifted, a living, breathing tapestry of absolute power. The Krell commander staggered backward, raising it his heavy gauntlets to shield his eyes. Tyrus, the Lumina traitor, froze in sheer terror. He fell to his knees, his hands covering his face. No, the pattern. It was supposed to be dormant. Valia did not walk. She glided through the heavy smoke, her bare feet silent on the metal grating. The light emanating from her pushed the steam away, creating a perfect clear circle around her. She stopped in front of Tyrus. She reached down. She didn't strike him. She gently placed her hands on either side of his head. "You call empathy a weakness, Tyrus," Valia said. Her voice was no longer just a sound. It was a vibration that shook the marrow in Harlan's bones. It was the voice of 100 generations of Lumina royalty speaking in unison. "Let me show you its strength." Valia closed her eyes. The golden light flared to an unbearable intensity. Harlan watched as the light bled from Valia's hands directly into the skull of the traitor. Tyrus screamed. It wasn't a scream of physical pain. It was a sound of absolute soul-tearing, psychological agony. Valia was using the primal pattern. She was ripping open the walls of his mind. She didn't just access his memories. She amplified them. She took every lie he had ever told, every drop of blood he had ever spilled, every ounce of ambition and cruelty that lived in his heart, and she forced him to experience it all at once from the perspective of his victims. He felt the blade entering the High Counselor's back. He felt the cold terror of the innocents he had sold to the Krell. He felt the crushing, infinite weight of his own absolute guilt. But Valia didn't stop there. The primal pattern was a bridge. The golden light pulsed outward in a massive, invisible shockwave. It passed through the steel hull of the Dust Runner. It passed through the heavy armor of the Krell Dreadnought. It washed over the entirety of Proxima Station. Every sentient mind within 1,000 miles felt the pulse. For 3 terrifying seconds, the entire sector stopped. The mechanics on the station's docks, the politicians in the high towers, the Krell gunners in the blockade. They all saw it, flashed directly into their minds, unavoidable and absolute. They saw Tyrus's treason. They saw the secret meetings with the Krell Empire. They saw the assassination of the Lumina King. They saw the truth. Tyrus collapsed onto the deck, convulsing, his mind completely broken by the weight of his own sins. He lay sobbing on the metal grating, curling into a fetal position. The Krell shock troops, trapped in their dead armorer, stood frozen in terror. They had just experienced a fraction of the psychic wave. Their morale shattered instantly. Valia slowly lowered her hands. The blinding light began to recede, drawing back into her skin, settling into a deep, steady, majestic gold. She turned to look at the Krell commander. "The Coalition fleet is already moving," Valia said, her voice calm and absolute in the silent smoking bay. "They have seen the truth of your unprovoked act of war. Drop your shields. Power down your weapons. Surrender or you will burn." The Krell commander looked at the broken Lumina traitor on the floor. He looked at the glowing goddess standing before him. He slowly reached up and unlatched his heavy helmet, letting it drop to the deck and surrender. Harlan slowly stood up. He leaned against the bulkhead, his chest heaving. The heavy wrench hung loosely from his right hand. He looked at Valia. She stood victorious. The queen returned, and as she looked back at him through the smoke and the settling dust, the golden light of the pattern softened. She was safe. The galaxy knew the truth. Harlan looked at her, and he knew with a heavy, crushing certainty that it was over. Hours later, the Dust Runner sat silently in a secure Coalition 5 IP docking bay. The chaos had subsided. Coalition security forces had swarmed the Krell dreadnoughts, arresting the commanders and securing the blockade. The Lumina High Council had arrived in droves, bowing before their awakened queen. The truth broadcast by the primal pattern had shattered the rebellion before it could fire a single shot. Harlan stood in the private observation lounge overlooking the docking bay. He had taken a shower in the station's transient quarters. He had scrubbed the engine grease from his hands with harsh chemical soap. He wore a clean set of gray canvas coveralls. He felt uncomfortable. He smelled like sterile air, not oil and ozone. The heavy glass doors of the lounge slid open. Valia walked in. She took Harlan's breath away. She was no longer wearing the oversized flight suit. She wore the traditional garments of the Lumina throne, flowing silks of deep twilight blue, accented with spun silver. A delicate crystalline crown rested on her brow. The primal pattern on her skin was exposed, glowing with a serene, confident light. She was the most powerful being in the sector. She was a ruler of billions, and she was miles away from him. She stopped a few feet from where he stood. The silence between them was different now. It wasn't the silence of survival. It was the silence of two different worlds colliding and then slowly pulling apart. "The Coalition has secured the Krell fleet," Valia said softly. "The traitors are in custody. My people are waiting for me to return to the homeworld to begin the coronation." "I know," Harlan said. He kept his hands in his pockets. He didn't want to reach out. If he touched her, he knew he wouldn't be able to let go. "I saw the news feeds." She stepped closer. The scent of ozone and sweet rain surrounded her. "The High Council has offered you a commission. Fleet Admiral of the Royal Guard. A permanent estate on the homeworld. You would never have to fly a scrap hauler again." Harlan looked down at the polished floor. A small, sad smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Me in a palace." He let out a dry chuckle. "I'd track engine grease all over the marble floors, Valia. I'd start tearing apart the royal shuttles, just to see how the hyperdrives work." He looked up, meeting her golden eyes. "I'm a mechanic," he said quietly. "I fix broken things. I haul scrap. That's who I am." Valia's eyes shimmered. The lines on her face pulsed with a sudden painful brightness. "You are more than that, Harlan. You are the man who held me in the dark. You are the man who gave me the strength to wake up. And you're the woman who gave me my hands back," he said, pulling his left hand from his pocket. He held it up, rock steady. "You gave me my life back. But that life is out there." He pointed toward the massive viewport out toward the infinite cold black of the stars. "My ship is patched," Harlan said, his voice thick, fighting the tightness in his throat. "But she still leaks. She still needs me." Valia reached out. She didn't use the primal pattern. She just used her hand. She gently touched the rough, scarred skin of his left arm. "I do not want to say goodbye," she whispered, a single tear cutting a path across the glowing lines of her cheek. "You have a galaxy to fix, Your Highness," Harlan said. "They need you more than I do." It was the biggest lie he had ever told, but he said it with absolute conviction. It was the only way he could let her go. He reached into the deep pocket of his coveralls. He pulled out the heavy, grease-stained tungsten torque wrench, the same one he had used to rupture the coolant line, the same one he used to keep his ship breathing. He took her smooth, pale hand, and he placed the heavy steel wrench into her palm. He folded her fingers over the cold metal. "For the leaks," he said, his voice breaking just a fraction. Valia looked down at the heavy, ugly tool. She held it like it was the most precious artifact in the universe. She clutched it to her chest, right over her heart. She looked up at him. "I see you, Harlan Cross," she whispered. Harlan gave a slow, deep nod. "I see you, Valia." He turned around. He didn't look back. He walked out of the observation lounge, the heavy doors sliding shut behind him, sealing away the light. 2 years later, the deep black. The dust runner hummed steadily through the void, a tiny speck of metal against the infinite canvas of the universe. Harlan sat in the command chair. He wore a faded, oil-stained jacket. A mug of black coffee rested in the cup holder. He reached out with his left hand and adjusted the navigational dial. His fingers moved with perfect precision. The scars were pale and faded now, a roadmap of a fire he had finally extinguished. The proximity alarm gave a soft, gentle chirp. Harlan glanced at the screen. A massive coalition cruiser was passing by on a parallel shipping lane. It was a beautiful ship, sleek and powerful. As it passed, the cruiser flashed its external running lights. Flash, flash, long flash. It was a standard spacer's greeting, but it was followed by a tight beam transmission directly to the dust runner's secure channel. Harlan hit the receiver. No voice came through, just a data packet. It was a navigational clearance code. An absolute unrestricted pass that allowed the dust runner to bypass any toll, enter any system, and dock at any port in the known galaxy without inspection. Harlan smiled, a slow, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He looked down at the center of the main dashboard. Welded directly into the scarred, battered titanium console was a small, heavy piece of metal. It was a solid gold crest, a geometric mandala intricately carved, glowing with a faint, eternal light. The royal seal of the Lumina Empire. He wasn't a fleet admiral. He didn't live in a palace. He was still a blue-collar scrap hauler, flying a rust bucket through the coldest parts of space. But as he wrapped his hands around the yoke and pushed the throttle forward, steering the dust runner into the deep unknown, Harlan Cross knew one thing for certain. He wasn't alone in the dark anymore.